In the heart of an ancient forest, where the moonlight filtered through the thick canopy of trees, there lived a vampire named Lucian. He was old, as ancient as the trees themselves, and his life was a lonely one, filled with the echoes of his past mistakes. One night, as Lucian wandered near the edge of the forest, he heard a soft cry. Curious, he followed the sound and discovered a small, swaddled bundle lying on the mossy ground. The baby was alone, abandoned with nothing but a note pinned to its blanket, reading, "Please keep her safe." Lucian, who had once been a feared creature of the night, found himself baffled by this tiny, helpless being. He hesitated, unsure if he could care for a child, but something in the baby's eyes stirred a long-forgotten warmth in his heart. Lucian knew he couldn't leave her there, so he carefully picked her up and carried her back to his hidden lair. In the dim light of his underground home, Lucian studied the baby, marveling at her innocence. He hadn't felt so alive in centuries. But with that feeling came the realization of the burden he had taken on. Lucian named her Lila, after a flower he remembered from his human life. He was determined to keep her safe, even though he knew nothing of raising a child. The first night was the hardest. Lila cried endlessly, and Lucian, who had no experience with babies, tried everything he could think of to calm her down. He rocked her gently, whispered old lullabies in a language long forgotten, and even tried to entertain her with shadows on the wall. Eventually, Lila fell asleep, leaving Lucian both exhausted and amused by the irony of a vampire struggling to comfort a baby. As the days turned into weeks, Lucian found himself growing attached to Lila. She brought light into his dark existence, and for the first time in centuries, he felt a sense of purpose. Despite his fears, Lucian was determined to give Lila a good life. He hunted for her, not for blood, but for milk and other necessities, and he learned to change her diapers with a mix of clumsiness and care. Lucian's once quiet lair was now filled with the sounds of Lila's laughter and cries, and he found himself smiling more than he had in ages. But with the joy came a deepening sorrow, for Lucian knew that Lila would grow up while he would remain the same. As Lila grew older, she began to walk, her tiny steps echoing through the underground halls. Lucian watched her with pride, but also with a heavy heart, knowing that each step took her further from the baby she once was. One day, while exploring the forest, Lila discovered a small, furry creature caught in a trap. She brought it to Lucian, her eyes wide with concern, and he couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of her trying to care for the wounded animal. Lucian helped her free the creature, and they watched as it scampered away, Lila's face lighting up with joy. It was moments like these that made Lucian wish he could freeze time to keep Lila young and innocent forever. But time marched on, and soon Lila was a young girl, curious about the world beyond the forest. She would ask Lucian about the humans, about the villages she had seen from afar, and he would try to answer her without revealing too much. He knew that one day she would want to leave to explore the world on her own. The thought of losing her filled Lucian with a deep sadness, but he knew he couldn't keep her hidden away forever. As Lila grew, so did her questions. She began to notice that Lucian never aged, that he never ventured out during the day, and that he always seemed to know when danger was near. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lila finally asked the question Lucian had been dreading. "Why are you different, Lucian?" Lucian looked into her eyes, seeing the innocence there, and knew he couldn't lie to her. He told her the truth about what he was, about the curse that had bound him to the night for all eternity. Lila listened in silence, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. When he finished, she reached out and took his hand. her small fingers wrapping around his cold ones. "I don't care," she said softly. "You're my family." Lucien felt a tear escape his eye, something that hadn't happened in centuries. He hugged Lila tightly, grateful for the love she had given him, even though he knew it couldn't last forever. Years passed and Lila grew into a young woman, beautiful and strong. She had learned much from Lucien, but she longed to see the world beyond the forest, to experience life as a human. Lucien knew the time had come. He couldn't keep her any longer, and it broke his heart. The night Lila left, Lucien stood at the edge of the forest, watching her disappear into the distance. She turned back once, waving at him, and he forced himself to smile, even though his heart was breaking. For years, Lucien waited, hoping she would return, but she never did. He remained in the forest, alone once more, but now his loneliness was filled with memories of Lila. One night, many years later, a young woman returned to the forest, a small child in her arms. She found Lucien where she had left him, standing under the moonlight, unchanged by time. "Lila," Lucien whispered, barely daring to believe it. She smiled, tears in her eyes, and held out the child. "I named him after you, Lucien." Lucien felt the warmth in his heart return as he took the child in his arms. He knew that, though time had taken much from him, it had also given him something precious, a family, even in his eternal night. The three of them stood together under the moon, a vampire, a mother, and a child, bound by love and blood, and the forest, once dark and silent, was filled with the sounds of life once more.